It happened in the fall of 2018, during one of the coldest and loneliest chapters of my life. My husband and I had moved to a secluded house deep in the woods of Vermont. The house was a modest structure, tucked at the very end of a narrow gravel path, surrounded by nothing but towering oaks and whispers of old folklore. Behind our house stretched a dense thicket of wild underbrush and gnarled trees, and at its heart stood a massive, ancient tree, a gnarled oak that loomed over the land like a sentinel. Locals called it the Hollow Sentinel. They spoke of it in hushed tones, their voices dropping to murmurs when they mentioned the legends surrounding it. It was said that strange occurrences had plagued anyone who ventured too close. Disembodied whispers, shadows that moved without light, and livestock that disappeared without a trace. I dismissed these tales as the musings of an overly superstitious town. My husband, David, was the pragmatic one in our marriage, always quick to laugh off anything he couldn't see or touch. "Just an old tree," he'd say. "What harm can it do?" Our house came with a small chicken coop that hadn't been used in years. We decided to revive it, imagining fresh eggs in the morning and a small slice of self-sufficiency. We bought a few hens from a nearby farm, and for a while, life in the woods was tranquil. Every morning, David would tend to the chickens, and in the evenings, I'd gather the eggs. The coop sat just at the edge of the woods, not far from the Hollow Sentinel. But I never thought much of it, until one of our chickens went missing. It was a chilly Tuesday evening, and the sun was setting behind the ridge, casting long skeletal shadows over the forest floor. As I went to secure the coop, I noticed one of the hens was gone. I counted again. 11. There should have been 12. I checked the latch on the coop, which was secure, and scanned the area around it. No feathers, no sign of a struggle. The hen had simply vanished. When David came home, I told him about the missing chicken. He shrugged it off, saying, "Probably wandered off. It'll come back." But it didn't. The next morning, David searched the property, calling out to the chicken as though it would respond. But there was no sign of it. "Maybe a fox got it," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. That night, as I was washing dishes, I heard a faint clucking sound. My heart leapt. Grabbing a flashlight, I stepped outside and followed the noise. It led me to the edge of the woods, where the towering oak stood, its branches twisting against the darkening sky. The sound grew louder as I approached, and then it stopped. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. I swung the flashlight's beam over the gnarled roots and up the trunk of the massive tree. I saw nothing unusual, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt watched, though I couldn't see anything beyond the beam of light. The air felt colder near the tree, and the faint smell of decay lingered. I backed away, nearly tripping over an exposed root, and hurried back to the house. When I told David, he laughed. "You're spooking yourself, it's just a chicken. Forget about it." But I couldn't forget. The following evening, the same thing happened. Just as I was settling in for the night, I heard it again, the faint cluck of a chicken. This time it sounded closer, almost as if it were coming from inside the house. My heart pounded as I checked every room, but there was no sign of the missing hen. The next few nights were restless. The clucking became more frequent, always faint and distant but unmistakable. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the woods. Other times it seemed to echo from the walls of the house itself. David said I was imagining things, but I could see the unease creeping into his eyes. On the fourth night, I found it, or what I thought was it. I was closing up the kitchen when I noticed something in the corner of my eye. A small, hunched shape in the shadows near the pantry. I froze. Slowly, I turned my head, my breath catching in my throat. It was the chicken. But something was wrong. Its feathers were matted and dull, and its eyes were black like polished stones. It didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared at me, unblinking and motionless. "David!" I screamed, backing away. When David came running into the kitchen, the chicken was gone. "I swear it was right there," I said, pointing to the corner. David frowned, searching the area, but there was nothing to find. "You need to calm down," he said. "You're working yourself up over nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Over the next few days, things escalated. Objects in the house started moving on their own. A chair would be out of place, or a cabinet door would swing open by itself. The clucking sound grew louder and more erratic, sometimes accompanied by faint scratching noises that seemed to come from inside the walls. And then there were the dreams. I dreamt of the tree, its massive, gnarled branches reaching out like claws, its hollow trunk pulsing with a sickly greenish light. In the dream, I saw something inside the hollow, a dark, writhing mass that seemed alive. It whispered to me in a language I didn't understand, but its intent was clear. It wanted something. When I woke, the clucking was louder than ever, and I could swear I saw movement in the shadows. One evening, David decided he'd had enough. "I'm going to that tree," he said, grabbing a flashlight. "No," I pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Don't go near it." He shook me off gently but firmly. "This has gone on long enough. It's just a tree, and we're letting it get into our heads." I watched from the window as he approached the hollow sentinel, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam flickered as he neared the base of the tree, and then it went out completely. "David," I called, my voice trembling. No response. "David." I grabbed my coat and rushed outside, my heart hammering in my chest. As I neared the tree, the air grew colder, and the smell of decay was overwhelming. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I swept it over the roots and up the trunk. And then I saw him. David was standing at the base of the tree, his back to me. His flashlight lay on the ground at his feet, its bulb shattered. "David," I whispered, stepping closer. He didn't respond. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and the moment my fingers brushed his coat, he turned. His eyes were black. I stumbled back, a scream tearing from my throat. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the only sound that came out was the clucking of a chicken, loud, guttural, and inhuman. I turned and ran, tears streaming down my face. Behind me, I heard the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling, as though something massive was moving through the woods. When I reached the house, I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. The clucking was everywhere now, echoing through the walls and floorboards. The lights flickered and the air felt thick and oppressive. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, the sounds had stopped, but David was gone. I searched for him, of course. The police were called and search parties combed the woods, but there was no trace of him. The official story was that he had gotten lost or injured and was taken by the elements. But I knew the truth. The house is empty now, but I still hear it sometimes. The faint clucking of a chicken carried on the wind. And in my dreams, I still see the tree, its hollow trunk glowing with that sickly light. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not finished with me.